Hello and welcome to the fourth video in this series. We're picking up where we just left off. So I have a mesh that's been oriented or rotated rather so that it's pointing up the right way. And as it is right now, this mesh is not going to be compatible with some of the commands that we want to do later on. So I need to create a new surface over top of this. And before we get going with that, you want to make sure that in this top view you're in rendered mode. So again, I'm just going to right click on the top and select rendered. If I'm in shaded or in wireframe mode, all I will see is just dark essentially. So make sure you're in rendered and you can actually see the terrain. So now I'm going up to surface and I'm going to select drape as the command. And by default, the spacing is set to 5, and what that means is that every 5 units within this file, it will take a sample and then create a surface based on those points. If I wanted to change this, I'm going to do that right now. So while hovering over that, I left-click, and it takes me to this separate prompt that says point spacing density. I'm going to change that to 20. And I'm going to press enter to accept that, and now you see that it's updated to 20. So it's asking me to drag a window over the area to drape. I'm going to left click and drag, and I don't have to collect the whole surface, but I want to make sure that the terrain is included in my selection, and I also want to make sure that I extend over just a little bit so it'll be easier to grab afterwards. When I'm happy with the selection, I'm going to release my left button, and it's just created a drape of that surface. And you can see there's quite a few areas where it sort of misses the surface, where there's a deviation between the original and the drape, and that's because of our density setting. And so to drag this out, I'm going to left click on this new surface that I just created, and if you need to go in closer to zoom in to actually select it, that's fine. You can always zoom out while it's still selected. And now I'm going to just left click again and drag it. And you'll also notice that as you're dragging something, you can still use the shift key to constrain your movement. So if I wanted this to sort of line up with what I had originally, that's how I would do that. When you release your left mouse button, you stop dragging. So that's at a setting of 20. I'm going to go back in and create a separate drape, and this time I'm going to change the space setting to 5. And again, I'm going to create a drape, and at 5 I start to collect quite a bit more information. You can see a lot more detail here than you can here. If I go into my perspective view, you can see that as well. I'm going to run this one more time, and this time I'm going to change the spacing to 1, press enter, and then create my drape. And this will take a little bit longer because now I'm creating a point sample for every 1 unit as opposed to every 5 units or 20 units. So it's a little bit denser. I'm going to select that again, and then when I've zoomed out far enough, I'm going to just drag it over. And you can maximize any viewport by just double clicking on it and it'll go larger. I can't do that while I'm recording, so I'm going to hit maximize. I'm going to right click and maximize to make this bigger. And there you go. So you can see the difference from 1 to 5 to 20. Why would you use 1 as opposed to 20? Or why wouldn't you use 1 all the time? Because of the level of detail, it'll probably run slower on your computer. So, and on top of that, you might want to abstract something. You might want to just get a sense of something as opposed to being bang on. You can also see, for instance, if I'm looking for a certain detail, let's say this area of the mountain range, this area just shows up as a slight hump here and starts to show up here a little bit better, but it's not until I actually go down to a space setting of 1 that I actually start to see that detail quite well. So at this point, I've done my drape, and I'm going to select these. You can select multiple items by hitting your shift key and then clicking on them. much like you would with other programs, or you can just simply left click in an empty area and then drag, and anything that's in that selection window will be selected at the same time. So I have all these selected. I'm going to hit delete, and now I'm left with just my single drape. I'm going to zoom selected so you can see it better. Okay. Before I go on with the next step, what I want to do now is I want to make sure that my units are correct. And what I mean by that is, by default, you're probably working in millimeters right now. So if you go to Tools and Options, Units is what we're looking for. It might be set to something else. You want to make sure this is on Units. And Model Units here says millimeters. I'm going to drop down and select inches and click OK. And it says Scale Model. Yes, that's fine. And I sort of seem to have lost everything, so I'm just going to right click on this top icon, and that'll sort of zoom everything back into view. Now, maybe for this next point, I want to make sure I'm in shaded view so that I can see the grid. When I'm in rendered view, the grid doesn't show up. So I'm going to be in shaded view now, and what I want to do is create a box, and this box is going to be a representation of the area that we're going to end up machining within. So to create a box, you go up to Solid, and it's the first option at the very top, and corner to corner height. You're going to select that, and it's asking me for the first corner of the base. Now I could just do this graphically, or I could just type in 0 and press enter, and that's the first corner of the box. It's sort of a dynamic display, and it placed it at the origin, which is 0, 0, 0. The other corner or base of base or length, I'm going to type in 3, and that's 3 inches essentially. I'm going to type in 3 for the width, or for the length rather. And finally for the height, it's asking me, I'm going to type in 1.5 because that's the size of the box that we have to work with. So that box right now is 3 by 3 by 1.5 high. And what we want to do, I'm just dragging this over, what we want to do is we want to fit our terrain. Just going to go back into rendered mode for a second. We want to fit this terrain into this box. So maybe at this point I'm going to stop this video because I think I'm getting close to my limit, and I'll see you at the next